Now, earlier on, we had indicated that we have with us in studio Mr. Nicholas Malaki, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Pine Bridge Investments. They are an investing house right across East Africa. He's here to give us his take on just the status of the Kenyan economy for the first half of 2016, and of course, to give us a focus on the rest of the year. Indeed, that interview be able to give us insights on just what to expect going forward. Thank you for taking the time to come into studio, sir. Now, my first question to you would be looking at the recent budget, because that is what is pertinent in most people's minds. What are the highlights that might have stood out for you?
Well, I think if you go backwards a little bit, yesterday that, this is a backdated kind of financing, where the length of, what we call the main roads has been done, but that tax is probably now maybe being recovered, just plug the gap for us to go to the extra mile. As you're aware, government wants to another 10,000 kilometers of tarmac, as well as trying to rehabilitate the existing road infrastructure and maintenance. One of the areas we have failed or have been lacking is maintenance. And I think maintenance is going to be a key part of the strategy going forward. So yes, the pain comes there today, but if it translates into better infrastructure, better access to markets, better access to regions, then you expect that to filter down into the overall economy, which is good for growth. And you have to go through that pain sometimes.
Yeah, two things stand out immediately. The fact that some pundits expect that inflation will start to trend upwards. And secondly, yesterday there was an announcement of even more roads to be constructed, about 45 kilometers to expand the trunk roads within Nairobi. Do we expect the pain to continue going forward?
Let me talk about inflation first. We have come from a period of very low inflation, supported by a number of factors. I think the main one has been, the low crude oil price in international markets. Currency has been stable, and that to an extent, has cushioned us. Again, local factors such as food supply, we've not gone through a supply shock.
Yes.
I think what is coming now is, what you'd call, we've seen an upside in oil prices, international markets, but I think currency is still stable. We don't have threats on food. So yes, there is that short-term risk that we could see inflation beginning to trend upwards, but of course we have got mitigating factors. Unless we see a very extreme movement in currency on the food side, which is the main element in the inflation basket, then yes, you'd say yes, we'll trend upwards, but I'm confident that staying within the central bank targets of 7.5 to 8% over the medium term.
Yes.
In the short term, you can see these volatilities, but you want to say over a 2-year, 3-year period, what you call the medium term, where is inflation, and certainly that should be within the targets that have been set up by the monetary authorities. The pain is there, but it comes with a respite, and it goes in cycles. Yes.
So many millions budgeted, but absorption continues to be a problem for much of Kenya's economy. In your opinion, what needs to happen so that we can see these funds starting to go into the intended holes that they have been budgeted for, especially when you bear in mind the developmental aspect of the budget?
Surprisingly, over the last, probably 2 or 3 years, the absorption rate of development expense has actually gone up. And one, because it is targeted, not necessarily to central government, but also through the devolved units. So the absorption has improved.
Yes.
We've come from levels about 40%, we're levels about 60%, which is still a bit low. But I think, if we continue with that pace, and then if we reach targets of about 80% of expenditure, that is good. I think one of the challenges has been, the process of procuring services within the fiscal cycle. Got a very long, tedious, sometimes very discouraging procurement process. But I think within the budget framework, doing what you call targeted budgeting, is you already have in mind what you need and you're trying to shut it down the procuring procedures. I think as those are being refined, then we are likely to see more absorption in the coming years, if not in this current financial year. Again, if it is for continuing projects, it is much more easier to have the incremental, funding to be able to complete, as opposed to new projects which have to be initiated through feasibilities, which takes a bit much more longer term than projects which are continuing. The major projects in Kenya around power, around roads are actually ongoing, and you'd expect, we are almost at the tail end of those particular projects. So the absorption rate should actually be much more in this financial year.
You talked about devolution and the fact that with the counties being something which is still relatively new, there's still a bit of, in my opinion, a challenge in terms of scrutiny of expenditure. While we have the Auditor General being able to look at the budget nationally, there are still, I think, a few gaps at the counties. What do you think needs to happen to ensure that we start to see, first, we start to hear less of scandals, because it seems like the only thing currently to hear about mismanagement of funds. What do we need to do to first ensure that people are able to police spending of their money, and secondly, to be able to, in hindsight, be able to check whether the money that was allocated was spent in the right ways?
Wait, so we have budgeting at two levels, budgeting at the national level and budgeting at the county level. I think what you're asking is budgeting at the county level, which is an oversight role of probably those particular institutions which are tasked to supervise, for example, the Senate.
Yes.
Now, what has been lacking, is like what has gone through is the normal information flow, the data keeping, the records. And I think once we have gone into e-financing, e-citizen, e-services, it's much more easier to be able to deal with that. But having said that, sometimes we tend to hear stories which we may not have enough authority to be able to make concrete comments on it. But certainly when you hear that consistently across, then there's something on it. And we have to trust the institutions and empower them, that which we have, to provide that oversight role to be able to do their work. And once their work is done, if mistakes have been done, then have it corrected. If there is theft, then people have to face it. That is the only way we think that you can be able to move forward in a matter of transparency and accountability. But again, county governments are new.
Yes.
I think we have had a 3-4 year learning lesson. We will continue learning how to coordinate these 44 institutions outside the central government, and that takes time, it takes learning, it takes experience. But as we progress, I believe we will be able to hack it at a particular point in time.
And I hasten to add that, of course, innovation will also be key.
Definitely.
And Nicholas, you sit at a place where you're able to have a sort of, so to say, overbearing view of the East African economy. And the fact that Britain's recent exit of the economic grouping of the European Union could have ramifications for economies such as ours. First, what is your take on what happened, and what do you think we should expect going forward?
Well, yeah, the world is a changing place. It's a dynamic, and that is what comes with globalization and interlinkages, both in terms of politics, in terms of trade, in terms of international financial flows. So you would expect that something which happens way off, which you've got nothing else to do with, in one way can impact you, because the trade linkages, the flows from those regions to here. But in the world now, we see a bit of divergence in terms of where the world is going. Whereas, for example, North America has a bit of growth. Central Europe, is a bit weak in terms of growth. Emerging markets, which are mainly commodity dependent, showing signs of stability, but I think they've gone through a very rough patch, and they're trying to rethink the structural issues within the economies on how to diversify them. Coming back to the region, surprisingly, the East African region has been a bit resilient, even in times past. Even during the global financial crisis, we are quite resilient. And one of the reasons we have been resilient over 2015 and projections from IMF for 2016, unlike the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, is that these countries are not very commodity dependent. So, for example, Kenya does not depend on one single commodity, neither does Tanzania, neither does Rwanda, for example, or Uganda. They are much more diversified economies, and though, yes, commodity prices have dipped, but we are faring much more better than countries which depend on a specific or a series of commodities. So with Brexit, the jury is still out there, but the EU is one of the largest trading partners within the region that we have. We trade with them under some trade agreements, so that may mean that although you are riding on those trade agreements with the EU, if Brexit has happened, then you may need still to go back to the table, negotiate with specific nations, Britain straight away and the EU straight away. So that in a way can slow down activity for some time. Yes. You would expect, especially on the export markets, on horticulture, for example, or on tea, and of course just movement of people within that particular region. So you'd expect, but I think it is too early to really tell, because the debate is supposed to be, what are the conditions for the exit from the EU, what is the negotiating table, and then once that is done, they know how much deep that will have an impact on us.
Very quickly, because we are running out of time, yes. I want you to give us your take on learnings from that for the East Africa community, especially bearing in mind Tanzanians' recent assertiveness and knowing that they have gas, they have recent helium discoveries, minerals such as gold and other things. What should the rest of the EAC expect?
The EAC, to be honest, despite, the common market protocol, the full movement of people and goods being there at the top level, I think on the ground it has really taken place. And probably it's a time to go back and say, what do our people want? This free movement of people, is it happening? Will it happen or won't happen? And we're supposed to make sure it's going to happen. But I think there are lessons to learn that whereas you may move at the top level on a policy perspective and talk at those regional conferences, I think the view downstairs to the common person really still matter because that is a person who is moving across the region, is a person who is trading across the region. So there are lessons we can learn from that.
Thank you. We would have loved to touch on the subject of national savings, of which there's a dearth of in Kenya, and the fact that not many Kenyans are saving enough to last them through their retirement or indeed build up all the projects that we're talking about. That is the reason we have to borrow, but unfortunately we have to do it to a close there because we're out of time.